must have been like to have been there, to be on the side of that mountain as Jesus took his disciples up and as the crowd then gathered. And this sermon in this sermon that we've been looking through, Jesus has been spelling out what it really means to follow him, what it means to live a life that is distinctively different from the world outside. You see, Jesus in this sermon has made it abundantly clear that it's not just about being a nice person. When we turn the Sermon in the Mount into the sermon of how to be nice, we do Jesus a huge disservice, because in this passage, he's made it clear in his whole sermon that actually we can't just tack Jesus onto the side of our old lives. But actually Jesus has to be at the centre, and our lives have to be distinctively different. We have to be changed from the inside. It's not just about looking religious. It's not about looking righteous. It's not about appearing to do the right thing. It's not even just about going to church on a Sunday. But it's about having a transformed heart and a life. And that theme continues here. But we're drawing to the end. We've got one more week next week. And so we're preparing to come down from the mountain. We're preparing to retreat from this wonderful encounter with Jesus and to re-engage the world. And the question is, will we be changed? Will we be different? Will we let these words of Jesus penetrate our hearts and our minds? And will we see evidence of change in our lives? And in today's reading, if you can see it, don't worry if you can't, we've got plenty of Bibles if you need one. I'm sure Dave will happily run round and deliver them. So we're going to be reading together these three warnings that Jesus gives us as we begin to draw to a close of the Sermon on the Mount, and that's what we're looking at today. So are you all right? Does anybody want a Bible? If you want a Bible, put your hand in the air now. Or forevermore hold your peace. Oh no, sorry, different service. The wide and the narrow gates, starting at verse 13. Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Cheerful, easy passage this morning. I must admit I sat down yesterday to write this with some trepidation, having had quite a week, to say the least. I offer you what I offer you today, and may God bless the words and make more of them than I have, hopefully, to you. The wide and the narrow gate. Quite a vivid image, isn't it, that? I'm not a walker. Those of you that know me would know that by now. I'm the sort of person that if I had the opportunity, I'd actually get in my car to come here to church. For those of you listening, I actually live through an adjoining door that touches the church, but you know, it still sometimes feels a bit far to walk. A few years ago, I had the bright idea of doing a sponsored walk. The idea being that me and anyone that was insane enough to join me, we were going to walk 26 miles along the side of the rivers and the Broads, and through the countryside from Norwich to Lowestoft. There's one thing that there's lots of things that East Anglia has going for it, but on that day the main thing was it's very flat. But this walk was scheduled to happen at the beginning of September, and it became clear sometime in mid-April that I couldn't even walk 2 miles, let alone 26. So my friend Sally Ann, who leads fitness walks for a living, decided to take me firmly in hand. And I use that term loosely, set up a training plan. And we walked, my goodness did we walk, 3 days out of every 7 at least we walked. We started when we first started at a mile at a time, and then gradually we built up. And then when we were in full training mode, when we were really going for it, we were averaging between 5 and 10 miles each day. We would do 26 miles over the course of the week. Now, when we were just going along short walks, when we were just starting, we walked along pavements, we walked around the streets, around the block, we walked the very short walk to the beach and back. But as the walks got longer and I got fitter, we started being braver. And we started venturing and going through these country footpath things and across fields and all over the place. And I have to tell you, we found some incredible treasures. We saw some beautiful sights, things that you would never ever see if you simply stuck to the main paths. At times we had to climb stiles, other times we had to wade through mud, we had to cross fields with cows in it. Thankfully we didn't have to do that too often, but my goodness was it worth it. At times, you know, when you find that secluded place with the most incredible view, and it feels like you're the only people on the planet, you're the only people to have ever seen this. I mean, you're not, but that's what it feels like. It's wonderful. But actually, there was one day, well, there was probably more than one day if I'm honest, but there was one day we'd set off for our training walk, and off we went, you know, special trainers on, walking poles, all that sort of thing, Sally Ann with her rucksack on her back. And this one day we set off for our training walk. We had a map of the route, but it was a gloriously sunny day. It was one of those days that you can just walk, and one tree starts to look very much like another tree, and somehow we managed to miss our turning. And we carried on walking, and as we kept walking, we started thinking, hold on a minute, this doesn't look right. A few more miles in, we noticed that actually we weren't seeing things that we expected to see, and the road had started to get quite a bit bigger, quite a bit busier, and that at times there was a central reservation down the middle of it. And we were getting a bit worried at the amount of traffic that we were starting to see and how fast it was going. And so, discretion being the better part of valour, we retreated to a safe bit between the road and the hedgerow, and we phoned for help. So at that point you realise, how on earth do you ask someone to come and rescue you and pick you up when you have absolutely no idea where on earth you are? When we were eventually rescued, it turned out that we'd missed our turning, we'd turned a road or two too late, and we'd ended up walking along the edge of the main A road into Norwich. No wonder it was blinking scary, and we were getting some strange looks from some of the drivers. I mean, over the course of that summer, I think we needed rescuing probably about 5 or 6 times in all for taking the wrong road and ending up going completely the wrong direction. Our walks that summer took us through some incredibly beautiful places. But at times we really had to watch our step because there were brambles, there were thorns. We used our walking poles to clear sometimes the way ahead of us. We walked tiny footpaths that we had to walk in single file because they were just about wide enough for one person. But my goodness, the beauty that we saw and the sense of achievement that we had when we'd stood somewhere that we'd had to work really hard to get to. I loved walking those paths. But when I'm driving, I hate narrow roads. Mostly because I haven't yet mastered the art of reversing. I've only been driving 31 years. So I'm still quite a learner, really. When I'm driving somewhere, when I want to get somewhere, I love motorways. I love an easy road, a wide road, where you just can point your car in the right direction, put cruise control on, and you get to places quickly. And there are nice service stations where you can grab a lunch or a cup of tea or, use the loo without worried about having a stinger in the wrong place. You learn very carefully, very quickly to be very careful when you're planning a sponsored walk. But you know what? Thank goodness nobody builds motorways to the edge of the Norfolk Broads. Because build a motorway and you ruin the beauty of the countryside. There are no easy roads to the most beautiful, to the most secluded viewpoints. There are no wide roads that you can hitch a lift when you get a bit tired. Just a narrow, narrow track that you really have to concentrate to follow safely. But if you want to reach the river, if you want to reach the view, if you want to get to your reward, the narrow footpath is the only way to go. In our passage this morning, Jesus said, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Because you see, Jesus, in his words in our passage this morning, he's saying there's more at stake here than just a pretty view or needing to get rescued from the main A road. Our choices on this earth have eternal consequences. Every single person alive, whether you recognize it or not, whether they recognize it or not, every single person alive is on one of two roads in life. Either we're on the motorway, we're going through the wide gate, we're traveling the broad road, we're taking the comfortable, the easy, the popular route. The thing is, Jesus said that road leads ultimately to destruction. On the way to hospital last week, I'm not sure I should share this with you. On the way to hospital last week, when Adrian was really seriously ill, Mark and I were in the car, we decided to cheer him up. And so we asked, if you were to die tomorrow, what song would you have at your funeral? Honestly, you really do have to understand our sense of humour and our coping mechanisms. And we were discussing all of these different songs. And one of the songs that Mark came up with was My Way by Frank Sinatra. Have you ever listened to the words of that song? Do you know it's actually the most recorded song in the history of music? It's the song that's most popular at karaoke evenings. My way. I did it my way. So many people are living life my way instead of God's way. They're on the wide road. But then there are some people who are following the narrow footpath, people who are going through the narrow gate, people who are choosing to take the difficult path, the sometimes painful path, the unpopular path, the path that can lead to us being ridiculed, the path that can lead to persecution. If anyone ever tells you that following Jesus is easy, if a preacher tells you that following Jesus is easy, they're lying to you. Jesus says this is the narrow path, this is the way less trod, it's the more difficult path, the thorny path, the one that you really have to concentrate, to stay on, because it's so easy to wander off and get lost and find yourself on the wrong path. But this is the path that leads ultimately to eternal life. Because you see, there is no motorway into heaven, church. There is no easy ride. You see, and this is the choice that Jesus has given his listeners today. In our world that kind of tries to say that all roads lead up the same mountain, that all roads lead to heaven, Jesus is really speaking he's taken that option away from us. He's putting a really stark choice before his listeners today. He isn't dressing it up. He says there are two ways, only two, not all of the roads. There are two ways, God's way or your way, and you have to choose. You have to choose. You see, because God won't force you to go where you don't want to go. Jesus isn't into forced conscription. You have to choose for him. You have to decide to follow. It's the same choice that God has always given his people. This isn't a new teaching that Jesus has brought. I mean, if you go right back to Deuteronomy chapter 30, right at the beginning, Moses has led the people out of slavery. He's brought them out of Egypt, and Pharaoh and all his armies have been defeated. And the Hebrew people, they stand on the edge of the promised land, on the brink of something new. And Moses speaks these incredible words from God to the people, offering them a choice. He says this, he says, "Now listen, today I am giving you a choice between life and death, between prosperity and disaster. For I command you this day to love the Lord your God and to keep his demands, decrees and regulations by walking in his ways. If you do this, you will live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you and the land that you are about to enter and occupy. But if your heart turns away and you refuse to listen, and if you're drawn away to serve and worship other gods, then I warn you now that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live a long, good life in the land you're crossing the Jordan to occupy. Today I've given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and curses. Now I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice you make. Oh, that you would choose life, so that you and your descendants might live. You can make this choice by loving the Lord your God, obeying him, and committing yourself firmly to him. This is the key to your life. And if you love and obey the Lord, you will live long in the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you see, it's the same choice. This is no new choice. This is no new teaching. Jesus is saying exactly what Moses said on the mountain that day. He's saying you have to choose. Oh, that you would choose life. Oh, that you would choose to follow Jesus. And it's the choice that Jesus offered the crowds on the mountainside, and it's the choice that he offers us today. To choose his way, to choose the way that leads to life, to choose the narrow path. You see, you don't get to heaven by accident. You don't get the rewards of eternity by just going with the flow. You don't get there by riding on the coattails of others. You have to choose for yourself. You have to follow for yourself. No one can do it for you. But it's a tricky path, one that we stumble on and wander away from often. So even though for many of us, though not for all of us, for many of us, we can pinpoint the day of our salvation. Many of us can pinpoint the day we gave our lives to Jesus. That doesn't mean that we've done it. We don't just choose once. We choose every day. We choose every hour. How many decisions have you made this morning already? What time to get up? What to have for breakfast? Whether to come to church or not? Thank you that you chose to come. What to wear? So many decisions we have to make every single day. And every day we have so many opportunities to follow Jesus or to do what we want. Will we choose to love and forgive? Or will we choose to walk away and bear a grudge? Will we choose to build each other up? Or will we choose to continue the gossip? Will we choose to speak well of each other? Or will we choose to do each other down? Will we choose to think the best of each other and give each other the benefit of the doubt? Will we choose to live and to love as Jesus loved us? Because there'll be lots of other voices, you see. There'll be lots of other voices that will try and tell us that we're wrong. And Jesus says, doesn't he, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. But by their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. This bit of the passage always reminds me of Little Red Riding Hood, with the wolf in disguise pretending to be Granny. And Little Red Riding Hood says, "Oh, Granny, what big eyes you have. All the better to see you with, my dear. And what big teeth you have. All the better to eat you with, my dear." And the boys used to have this little ladybird book of this story, and there was a picture of a very obvious wolf sitting in bed wearing a sort of a bed cap and a nightie and Granny's little round glasses. Sadly, it's not as easy in real life always to spot a wolf. And there are, unfortunately, many people who would seek to lead God's people astray. People who would twist God's words. Now, I just want to make this clear now. This is not talking about people who are genuinely and honestly trying to follow Jesus, but who get things wrong. Because let's face it, that's every single one of us. Because the only perfect person is Jesus. So this isn't talking about genuine people who are genuinely trying to follow Jesus but mess up. I once heard Steve Chalk speak at Spring Harvest, and he was wonderfully humble. And he said, some of the things that I used to believe most sincerely and preach most forcefully are some of the things I now believe I got most wrong. Because you see, we're all on a journey, every single one of us. We're all trying to follow Jesus. We're all trying to learn more and more about him each day. We sang it, didn't we? Knowing you, Jesus. We want to know him better. We want to follow him closer. And we all get things wrong. But that's not what Jesus was warning against here. We've already said that at the time the Pharisees and the scribes and the religious leaders, they'd set themselves up, hadn't they, as the guardians of God. They were the ones who interpreted the laws that God gave through Moses. They were the ones who decided how much your offering should be, how long you should pray for each day. They were the ones who decided whether you were in or whether you were out, whether you were good enough or whether you were not good enough to be in God's camp. But actually, when you looked at their lives, was there evidence of the fruit of the Spirit? Is there evidence of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? You see, because these are the fruit that God promises to grow in us when we follow him. When people point to someone as God's man, don't just believe all the hype. Look at their lives. Don't just go with the flow. Don't mindlessly jump on the bandwagon. Look for evidence of fruit. Because Jesus said that's how we'll be able to tell if they really are God's person. If they really are appointed by him and anointed by him. Look for fruit. What do their lives look like? Are they growing good fruit or bad fruit? But be careful, church, be careful. I issue you a warning now. This is not an opportunity for us to be judgmental, judging each other's fruits harshly. That would be poking at the splinter in someone else's eye while ignoring the plank in your own. Jesus has already warned us about that. This is a warning that says, look, if you choose to follow, you really do have to follow. The narrow way is hard. It's so much easier to go with the flow. It's so much harder to love unconditionally, to forgive freely, to bless openly, to encourage wholeheartedly, and to give generously. But church, we have to. Otherwise it's not faith, it's lip service. But the rewards for following, the rewards for choosing are eternal. Jesus offers us life today in all its fullness. but reaching into eternal life. Very briefly, before we finish, we need to address those final verses, verses 21 to 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Can I say honestly, I don't for a minute believe that Jesus is talking about you. If you're seeking to follow him, if you are choosing to follow him, even if you mess it up and get it wrong like we all do, then he's not talking about you. So take a few deep breaths, people, and relax. He's talking about false prophets. He's talking about religious leaders who preach a gospel other than Jesus. He's talking about people who are deliberately misleading the people of God. So panic not. Today I want to give you a clear choice, just like Jesus did. Your way or God's way. This is no throwaway decision. This is no tea or coffee choice. This is the single most important decision that you will make in your whole life. The decision that has eternal consequences. Today, will you choose the way that leads to life? I don't know. Maybe you have been going to church all of your life, but you've never understood the difference between being a church goer and being a Christian who is just, got Jesus at their very heart, who's filled with the Holy Spirit. Maybe you've just gone with the flow. Maybe you go to church, it's because it's what you've always done. Today, will you make a definite decision to choose life, to choose to follow Jesus? And so I invite you right now to make a decision. To make a decision. Because believe me, you are making it. You are making it. If you are choosing, if you're sitting there today saying, no, I'm not choosing Jesus, then you're making your decision. You just might not realize it. The single most important decision you will ever make, which road will you go on? Will you go along with the flow and stay on the wide road, or will you choose the narrow road? And I invite you to make a decision and then to make a visible witness of that decision to follow Jesus. Because you see, you might have been christened or dedicated as a baby. Wonderful. God bless your parents for doing that. You might even have gone on to be confirmed, hallelujah, that God has held you so close as a child. Brilliant. But maybe you've never been baptized on that declaration of your own faith, on your own words. I choose to follow Jesus. Today, choose to be obedient, choose to follow Jesus, and to declare openly that choice and witness through the waters of baptism. Choose Jesus, choose life, and declare that choice to the whole world. Choose Jesus because he chose you before the creation of the whole world. Church, he loves you. You are his. He died and he rose again for you. Will you choose to follow him? We're going to sing our final song, one of my